On Christmas morning, I found my suitcase by the trash. "It's her house now," my son wrote. He didn't know I still held the $14.00 deed and a reason to come back. Christmas morning in Alaska has a kind of stillness that can make you forget the rest of the world exists. But that morning, the quiet was broken before I could even take my first sip of coffee. I had just slipped on my old wool cardigan when I saw it. My suitcase, the faded brown leather one I had owned for decades, sitting right next to the trash bin outside. Snow had gathered on its seams like frost on a forgotten gravestone. I opened the front door, my breath turning to mist in the icy air, and stood there, staring. Riley was already on the porch, arms crossed, wearing that smirk she reserved for moments she wanted to make sure I felt small. "Your suitcase is the most rancid thing in this house," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "From now on, this is Lily's house. You should take that and disappear." My eyes flicked from her to Matt, who was leaning against the doorframe behind her, hands in his pockets like he was doing me some kind of favor just by standing there. "You know, Mom," he said casually, "Lily wants you out. I'm just respecting her wishes." His tone was calm, but the way his eyes avoided mine told me this had nothing to do with Lily's wishes and everything to do with his own. Then Alex appeared, all 6 feet of arrogance, bouncing a basketball against the porch rail before letting it drop onto the snow. "Old lady," he said with a laugh that sounded more like a bark, "why don't you go live on the street so we can breathe around here?" He kicked the ball into the yard, like even it didn't deserve to be near me. I looked past them to the staircase inside. Lily was standing halfway down, her hands gripping the banister, eyes wide and glossy. She didn't say a word, but her mouth pressed into a tight line told me she wanted to. She was 22 now, but in that moment she looked like the scared little girl I used to pull into my bedroom when the shouting downstairs got too loud. I stepped forward, and Matt moved just enough to make it clear he wasn't going to help me carry the suitcase. I didn't ask him to. I bent, grabbed the handle, and felt the cold bite into my fingers. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I stepped off the porch. The wind swept hard enough to push the edges of my coat open, and I pulled it tight, the suitcase rolling awkwardly over the uneven path. Behind me, the door slammed shut, with a sound that echoed in the winter air, a sharp finality that could have been mistaken for the crack of a rifle. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I'd see Riley leaning against the frame, satisfied, Matt disappearing into the kitchen like this was just another chore he'd checked off, and Alex probably still laughing. I walked toward the road, my breath fogging in front of me, the snowflakes landing on my cheeks, stinging like tiny pinpricks. The cold was deep, but not as deep as the hollowness in my chest. They thought this was the end of me. They thought throwing me out on Christmas morning would be the last chapter of my life. They had no idea that I still held the one thing that could shatter every lie they'd built. The $14 million 0-cent deed to the house they stood in, and something else far more dangerous, the truth. And I wasn't done with them yet. I have lived long enough to know that cruelty rarely blooms overnight. It grows quietly, in the shade, watered by ego and entitlement. Matt had been that way since he was a boy, proud, headstrong, convinced the world should bend to him. Even then, I saw how his eyes lit up when a boy excelled at sports, and how they dimmed when it was a girl doing the same. When Lily was born, I thought maybe the sight of his daughter's tiny hands, her little breath puffing in the hospital air, might soften him, but I was wrong. The day he held her for the first time, his smile faltered the moment the nurse said, "It's a girl." By the time she was 3, he'd perfected the art of ignoring her, dismissing her drawings, her questions, even her attempts to hug him. When he did pay attention, it was to correct her in that sharp, cutting way that leaves marks you can't see. By the time she was 10, he'd stopped pretending to be a father and started treating her like a disappointment. Alex was the opposite story. He wasn't even mine to raise. But Matt doted on him like he was a prince. He excused every tantrum, defended every mistake, even when Alex's behavior crossed the line into outright cruelty. From the time he could walk, Alex had a smirk that told you he believed he was untouchable. When Lily was grounded for talking back, Alex could hurl a toy at my head and be rewarded with ice cream. He learned early that respect was optional, especially toward me. "She's old, she won't remember," he'd say right in front of me, and Matt would laugh. Years earlier, before Riley had fully woven herself into our lives, Matt's bad investments left him with nothing. I had the means to help. Not much, but enough. I signed papers making Lily and me co-owners of the house, a safety net so there would always be a place for her. At the time, Matt thanked me, said I was saving the family. But gratitude has a short life in some people. All those years, I kept a single envelope hidden in the locked box beneath my bed. Inside was the truth that could rip Matt's entire world apart. The DNA test results from decades ago, proving he was not my biological son. I'd learned the truth after my husband passed, when sorting through his things led me to hospital records that didn't match. I sent in a DNA kit, and the results came back clear. Matt was the son of my husband's brief, shameful affair. I never told him. I never told anyone. I told myself it was because I wanted to protect my husband's dignity, to preserve what little peace remained in our family. But part of me also hoped that if I just kept loving Matt as if he were truly my own, he might grow into a man who deserved that love. I thought my silence was mercy. Mercy, it turns out, is wasted on those who mistake it for weakness. It was the night before Christmas Eve, the house filled with the smell of roast meat and spiced cider, the kind of warm holiday air that fools outsiders into thinking a family is happy. I had spent weeks knitting scarves for everyone, using leftover yarn I'd saved from years gone by. My fingers had worked late into the night, each stitch carrying the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd see the love behind it. When it was my turn to hand out gifts, I walked over to Alex first. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I said, offering him the scarf in a deep forest green, his favorite color. He took it, unrolled it halfway, and then tossed it onto the coffee table with a smirk. "You think anyone wants this junk? You can buy one like this for $5 at Walmart," he said loudly enough for the whole room to hear. A few guests chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh or look away. My cheeks burned, but I kept my smile. Before I could respond, Matt's voice cut through the murmurs. "Don't mind her," he said to a couple from his office. "My mom just stays here. She doesn't really contribute. It's more of a charity situation." He chuckled, sipping his drink, his eyes sweeping the room for approval. I felt Lily stiffen beside me. "That's not true," she started, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "Grandma," but she stopped when Matt turned his gaze on her. It wasn't loud or violent, just a look. Sharp, cold, a warning she'd known her entire life. Her shoulders dropped, and she pressed her lips together, retreating into silence. Riley, never one to miss an opening, leaned against the kitchen doorway, swirling her wine. "If it were really our house," she said with a laugh that dripped venom, "she would have been out on the street years ago." The room seemed to hum with an uncomfortable energy, people shifting in their seats, pretending to check their phones or reach for their drinks. I stood there holding the last of the scarves, the one I'd made for Lily, my hands trembling just enough that the yarn quivered. I wanted to leave right then, to walk into the cold and never look back. But instead, I handed it to her quietly, and she took it with both hands, her eyes locking on mine for a moment, soft, grateful, and full of something she didn't dare say out loud. The rest of the evening went on in forced cheer. Laughter bubbled from corners where the drinks were strongest, but for me, every laugh felt like it was aimed in my direction. They thought they'd humiliated me, reduced me to the frail old woman who didn't contribute. They didn't know I had been keeping score for years. And their day was coming. Snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets that night, the kind that swallows sound and makes the whole world feel like it's holding its breath. Inside, the last of the guests had gone, the house reeking faintly of wine and resentment. I was sitting in the corner of the living room, knitting bag by my feet, when Matt came in, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Lily wants you gone," he said, his tone flat, almost rehearsed. "She thinks it's best for everyone if you move on." I looked up from my seat. Lily wasn't in the room. "Did she tell you that herself?" I asked. Matt's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer my question. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be, Mom. You've been here long enough." Riley appeared in the doorway behind him, sipping from a mug and smiling, like she was watching her favorite soap opera. "We already moved your suitcase," she said lightly. "By the trash. Thought we'd save you the trouble." I stood, reaching for my coat. "On Christmas Eve?" I asked. Better than Christmas morning, Matt replied. His eyes flickered toward the door, a silent signal for me to go. I bent to pick up my knitting bag, and that's when Alex came down the hall, dribbling a basketball across the polished floorboards. He stopped right in front of me, grinned, and then bounced the ball hard against my shin. The sting shot up my leg. "Hurry up, Grandma," he said. "Street's not going to shovel itself." Riley laughed, not even pretending to hide it. I straightened slowly, looking at each of them in turn. Matt's impatience, Riley's amusement, Alex's smugness. They were so sure this was the end of me. I pulled on my coat, wrapped my scarf, and wheeled my suitcase toward the front door. The wind outside howled against the frame, rattling it like impatient knuckles. I stepped into the storm, the snow blinding and bitter cold on my cheeks. The suitcase's wheels dragged in the drift, but I kept moving, one step after another. Behind me, I heard the door close, not slammed, not thrown, but shut with a quiet certainty, like a seal pressed into wax. They thought they had cast me out into nothing, but I walked into that storm with my spine straight, the cold air filling my lungs, my hand gripping the handle of the suitcase that carried more than clothes. I still had the deed, I still had the truth, and I was done protecting them. The courthouse was warm, almost stifling, but my hands were ice-cold around the leather folder I had carried in with me. The judge's bench loomed above us, the wood polished to a mirror sheen, the state seal glinting in the light. Matt sat at the opposing table, in a dark suit that did nothing to hide the tension in his shoulders. Riley was beside him, looking bored, and Alex slouched in the row behind them, chewing gum like it was a joke. Lily sat next to me, her hands folded tight in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. When the judge called our case, I rose slowly, my knees protesting, but my back straight. "Your Honor," I began, "I am here to establish the truth and to protect my granddaughter." I laid the first document on the evidence table, the co-ownership deed. This house was never solely Matt's. 5 years ago, I signed as co-owner with Lily to keep a roof over all of our heads when Matt's debts nearly took it away. Without my signature, he would have lost it then. The second folder I placed down contained photographs and written statements, Lily's bruises, the reports she was too afraid to file at the time. "This," I said, my voice tightening, "is the evidence of the harm Matt has caused his daughter. Physical, emotional, and deliberate. This is why she asked for my help." The third envelope was heavier, its contents rattling slightly as I set it down. "And this," I said, locking eyes with Matt, "is the DNA result I have kept hidden for decades. Matt is not my biological son. My late husband fathered him during an affair. I have known this for years, but I chose silence, for his sake, for my husband's memory. That silence ends today." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, the kind that carries disbelief and gossip in equal measure. Matt's face darkened, his fists clenching on the table. "You," he began, but I held up my hand. "I am not finished," I said, and from my folder came the final set of papers, medical records. Matt has been diagnosed with severe oligospermia. In plain terms, he cannot father children naturally, which means Alex is not his biological son either. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the judge sat back slightly, letting the weight of it settle. Riley's eyes darted to Matt, then away, her lips pressing into a thin line. Alex straightened in his seat, confusion replacing his usual smirk. Matt surged to his feet, pointing at me. "You planned this. You waited all these years just to stab me in the back." His voice cracked with rage, echoing off the walls. "No," I said, my tone calm but unyielding. "I waited because I hoped you might grow into a man worth protecting. But instead, you used every ounce of my patience to sharpen your cruelty. You hurt your daughter. You humiliated me. You built your life on lies. Now the truth is here, and it is not leaving this room." The judge banged the gavel, calling for order, but I didn't need to say more. My evidence sat on the table, unshakable. And for the first time in decades, Matt had nothing to stand on. Matt was still standing, his face flushed a dangerous shade of red, when I turned slightly toward him and let my voice cut through the courtroom's hum. "Matt," I said, each syllable deliberate, "are you certain Alex is yours?" The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Riley's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing, the color draining from her face. Matt froze, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. From my folder, I pulled a printed stack of text messages, every one of them dated, every one of them preserved exactly as they appeared. I handed them to the bailiff, who delivered them to the judge. "These," I said, "are messages between Riley and a man named Cole Henderson. They date back 18 years. In them, Riley speaks about being pregnant and how she hopes Matt won't question the timing." The judge scanned a few lines before looking over his glasses at Matt. Riley shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly, her knuckles blanched. I kept my eyes on Matt. "You see? You have been so eager to shame and discard me, to accuse me of betrayal, but the truth is, you have been raising another man's child while mistreating the daughter who has always been yours, in every way but blood." Alex shot to his feet, his voice loud and raw. "You're a damned liar. You're nothing but a bitter old witch who wants to wreck our family." His words dripped with the same arrogance he'd learned from Matt. I didn't flinch. My voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You were never my family, Alex, and you were never his either." A collective gasp rose from the benches. Riley turned her gaze toward the wall, avoiding both Matt's eyes and Alex's. Matt's expression shifted from rage to something darker. Humiliation, confusion, the bitter taste of being deceived in the same way he had deceived others for years. The irony hung heavy in the air, a poetic symmetry no one could ignore. I simply folded my hands and let the silence speak for me. The judgment came down faster than even I expected. The gavel struck once, sharp and final, and the house, the one I had co-owned, the one they had thrown me out of, was legally mine and Lily's. Matt's name was stripped from it like old paint. His custody over Lily was gone, his record now bearing the ugly stain of domestic abuse. I thought that would be the end of it, but life has a way of cutting deeper. 2 weeks later, the phone rang. It was a neighbor, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Nora, you'd better sit down. Riley's gone. She took Alex and all the money from Matt's accounts. The police are looking for her." I didn't need to ask with whom she had run. Cole Henderson's name flashed in my mind, along with every smug little lie Riley had told over the years. When I arrived at the house to collect my things, Matt was there, but he wasn't the man who had sneered at me on Christmas Eve. He was sitting on the front step in the snow, coat unbuttoned, hair uncombed, a duffel bag at his feet. His eyes were hollow. "She took everything," he said when he saw me. His voice was hoarse. "The money, the car, Alex, I don't even know where they are." I walked past him toward the door, the new keys warm in my hand. "You still have the roof over your head for now, but not for long." That's when he dropped to his knees, right there in the snow. "Mom, please, let me stay. I have nowhere else to go." His hands were outstretched, shaking. I turned to face him fully, feeling none of the pity he might have hoped for. "You were never my son, Matt, and even if you had been, blood doesn't excuse what you've done. Blood doesn't erase cruelty. It doesn't absolve you of your choices." The wind gusted between us, carrying his shallow, panicked breaths. I stepped inside and closed the door, leaving him kneeling in the snow, exactly where he had left me. The wind outside was sharp and restless, rattling the bare branches like bones, as if winter itself was mocking him. I stood at the front window, my hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa, the steam curling into the air like soft ribbons. The mug was one Lily had painted for me last year, bright red cardinals perched on pine branches, a little uneven, but made with love. I had kept it because it was hers. Through the curtain of snow, a figure stumbled down the street. Matt. Even from here I could see the way the wind slapped at him, how his thin coat clung to his frame like a wet rag. His head was bowed, his steps uneven, stubborn rather than strong. He was passing the very spot where, one Christmas morning years ago, my suitcase had sat beside the trash. I remembered the weight of that suitcase, not just the clothes inside, but the finality of it, the knowledge that I had been discarded like garbage by my own flesh and blood. That day, I had walked away with nothing but my dignity and a vow I never spoke aloud. One day, I would decide who entered my home and who didn't. I didn't open the door. Behind me, Lily was stringing the last of the Christmas lights along the mantel, humming under her breath. Her laughter was soft, unguarded. The tree glowed in the corner, its ornaments catching the firelight, small wooden stars, tiny snowmen we'd painted ourselves in the years after I took her in. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, not because it was grand or expensive, but because it was ours. Safe. Warm. I turned from the window, letting the snow swallow Matt from my sight. "This house," I said to Lily, my voice steady, "belongs to the people who know how to love it." She turned, her eyes bright in the glow, and stepped forward to hug me. Her cheek pressed against my shoulder, and for a moment I felt the smallness of her again, the child who once looked at me for safety. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the lights bathed the room in gold. I knew Matt would keep walking until the snow buried his footprints. He would pass the diner at the corner, its windows fogged with other people's warmth, and maybe, for the first time, he would understand what it was to be on the outside of a life you thought you owned. The storm could rage all it wanted, but it couldn't touch what we had in here. This was our home now. Not his, not Riley's, not Alex's. Just mine and Lily's. A place rebuilt from the ruins they left behind. I reached up and fixed the final ornament on the tree, a small, carved wooden key Walter had given me before he passed. On the back, in his neat handwriting, were the words, "For the keeper of the home." I smiled to myself. I was the keeper now, and I intended to keep it safe. That night, as the snow pressed against the windows like a patient enemy, I sat by the fire and let myself breathe for the first time in years. Matt was out there somewhere, walking streets he once thought he owned, feeling the kind of cold no blanket can fix. And I realized something. The greatest revenge is not shouting at the door you have closed, but sitting inside it, warm, with the people who truly belong. Lily sat beside me, tucking her feet under the blanket we shared. "Grandma," she said softly, "I don't miss them." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Neither do I answered. Outside, the wind carried away the last echoes of their cruelty, leaving only silence, not emptiness, peace. That winter was the last time Matt ever stood on my street. Months passed, and life began to grow in the spaces they had once poisoned. Seasons turned quietly, each one stitching a little more light into our lives, until the day came when the snow finally melted and the air smelled of lilacs again. 2 years later, winter had given way to spring, and the air smelled of thawed earth and blooming lilacs. The little church in town had been dressed in white ribbons and fresh flowers, the pews polished until they gleamed. It was Lily's wedding day. That morning, she had come into my room in her gown, ivory lace that shimmered when it caught the light. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived more than her share of storms. In her hair, just above the veil, was the brooch I had worn on my own wedding day. "You'll be in the front row," she told me, her voice firm. "You've been my mother in every way that matters. I want you to be the first person I see when I walk in." The words caught in my chest, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I only nodded and took her hand, squeezing it once, memorizing the warmth. The guests filled the church, murmurs and laughter floating beneath the sound of the organ. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, scattering blues, greens, and reds across the floor. I sat in the front row, exactly where she wanted me. The music changed, and everyone rose. Lily appeared in the doorway, framed by the light. The veil softened her features, but her eyes were locked on mine. She smiled, steady, certain, and mouthed, "Thank you." And that was when I saw him. Matt stood at the back of the church, just inside the open doorway. His hands were shoved into his pockets, his shoulders hunched as though he was trying to make himself smaller. He wasn't invited. He had no right to be here. But there he was, watching. I had heard from a mutual acquaintance that he had been drifting from place to place, and I suppose word of Lily's wedding found him in whatever shadow he was calling home. For a moment, our eyes met. His were full of something I had never seen in him before. Not anger, not pride, but the hollow ache of a man who realizes too late that the door has been closed forever. I turned my gaze back to Lily without a second thought. He didn't try to come forward. Maybe he knew what would happen if he did, or maybe he finally understood that he had no place in her life anymore. Lily reached the altar, her groom waiting with an expression that made me believe in second chances. The vows were spoken, promises made, and when they kissed, The church erupted in applause. I rose with everyone else, clapping, but my eyes flicked to the back. Matt was gone. No sound, no goodbye, just a shadow slipping away. At the reception, beneath strings of fairy lights, Lily made her way through the crowd to where I sat. She lifted her glass and called for quiet. "This woman," she began, her voice steady, "saved me. Not just from a house, but from a life that would have broken me. She gave me a home, she taught me love, and she showed me that family is chosen by the heart, not the blood." Applause erupted, glasses clinked, and I blinked back tears. Somewhere out there, maybe leaning against the dark side of the building, Matt might have heard her words. If he did, I hoped they sank into him like the cold had that Christmas night. Because some doors once closed, never open again. That night, after the guests had gone and the last lantern was blown out, Lily and I sat together under the stars. She leaned her head against mine, her wedding ring glinting in the moonlight. "You kept me safe," she whispered. "You kept me alive," I replied. And as the night settled around us, I realized something I hadn't before. Every storm I'd endured, every betrayal, every bitter word had led to this moment. A home, a daughter, and a future where the only people who walked through my door were the ones who deserved to. The years after Lily's wedding moved quietly, like pages turning in a book whose ending I had already chosen. The seasons in Alaska have their own rhythm. Long, cold winters that test your patience, and short, brilliant summers that reward it. In those years, my home never knew the kind of shouting or slamming doors that had once been its soundtrack. There was laughter in the kitchen now, the kind that starts over breakfast and lingers into the evening. And sometimes, when the air was warm enough, we left the windows open, just to let the sound spill outside. Lily and her husband Daniel lived nearby, but not so near that we tripped over each other's lives. Daniel was a quiet man, the kind who measured his words before he spoke, but when he looked at Lily, there was nothing cautious in his expression, only the steady certainty of a man who knew what he had. I had liked him from the first handshake. It was late one October afternoon, the light slipping into that golden hour that makes even the frost look warm, when Lily knocked on my door. She didn't wait for me to answer, just pushed it open and stepped inside, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Daniel followed a step behind, carrying a paper bag that smelled faintly of fresh bread. I was setting 2 mugs of tea on the table when I noticed the way Lily's hands were folded over her stomach, almost protective, like she was holding something fragile. She didn't speak right away, and for a moment I thought she might be upset. Then she smiled, small, almost shy, and the words came out in a whisper. "Grandma, I'm pregnant." The mug in my hand nearly slipped, but I caught it just in time. The room seemed to shift, like the air itself had thickened. For a heartbeat, I saw her as she had been at 5 years old, standing in my kitchen in pajamas with little yellow ducks on them, asking me if I would still love her when she was big. I crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her into my arms, feeling the warmth of her through her coat. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, my voice breaking just enough to betray me. I pulled back to look at her face, at the joy there, at the relief. "You're going to be a wonderful mother." Daniel set the bag on the counter and came to stand beside her, one hand resting lightly on her back. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all. We sat together for hours that evening, talking about nothing and everything. Baby names, the small nursery in their house, the way the light came through its one window in the morning. Lily laughed at my suggestion of Eleanor and pretended to consider Walter if it was a boy. It felt like we were weaving a blanket out of our words, something warm enough to wrap around the child we hadn't yet met. It wasn't until a week later that the past came knocking again. The mail had just been delivered when I saw it, a small package sitting on the top of the stack. No return address, but the handwriting on the label was unmistakable. Matt's. I hadn't seen him since the wedding, when he had appeared like a shadow at the back of the church and slipped away before the reception. I had no interest in seeing him now, but the package wasn't addressed to me. It was for Lily. I called her, and she came by that afternoon, still in her work clothes, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. Daniel was with her, his hand brushing hers every time they stepped around each other in my small kitchen. "This came for you," I said, sliding the package across the table. She frowned, reading the label, and then glanced up at me. "It's from him." The words were heavy in her mouth, as though speaking them gave them more weight than they deserved. She didn't open it right away, just turned it over in her hands, like she was trying to feel its contents through the paper. Daniel stayed silent, leaning against the counter, his eyes on her face. He wasn't going to tell her what to do, and I could tell he trusted her enough not to need to. Finally, she looked at me. Should I open it? The question was more than just about the package. I could hear it in her voice. Should I let him in? Should I take even this much from him? I didn't answer with words. Instead, I reached across the table and laid my hand gently over hers, then let it slide down to rest lightly on her stomach. She was only just starting to show, but I could feel the warmth there, the quiet promise of life. I met her eyes and smiled, not the polite kind you give to strangers, but the deep, steady smile that says, I see you, I know you, and I will always be on your side. Her eyes softened, and she set the package on the table without opening it. No, she said finally, he doesn't get to be part of this. Daniel moved then, crossing the room to stand beside her. He slipped his arm around her shoulders, his other hand resting briefly on mine. It was a small gesture, but in it was something unshakable. Gratitude, trust, love. We sat like that for a long moment, the three of us connected by something far stronger than the blood Matt had once used as his weapon. Later, after they had gone, I picked up the package and turned it over in my hands. Whatever was inside didn't matter, not anymore. I set it on the porch in the snow, and by morning it was gone. Maybe the wind took it. Maybe someone else did. Either way, it was no longer ours to worry about. The winter deepened, and with it came preparations for the baby. Lily and Daniel painted the nursery a pale yellow, the kind that catches the sun and turns it into gold. I crocheted a blanket in soft cream yarn, the stitches looping together like the years we had shared, some tight, some loose, but all holding. One evening, as the first heavy snow of the season fell outside, Lily came over with a sonogram picture. She held it out to me, her smile wide. "Meet your great-grandchild," she said. I took the photo in my hands, tracing the tiny, perfect curve with my thumb. "They have your nose," I said, and she laughed. That night, after they left, I sat by the fire with the picture on the table beside me. The shadows danced on the walls, and for the first time in decades, I felt like every part of my life, every wound, every betrayal, every storm, had led to this warmth, this peace. When the baby came in late spring, the world seemed to bloom all at once. The lilacs outside the church where Lily had been married opened on the same day, their scent spilling into the air like a blessing. In the hospital room, Lily lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, the baby swaddled in her arms. Daniel stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, his eyes never leaving her face. I stepped closer, my knees aching but steady. Lily looked up at me, her eyes bright. "Grandma," she whispered, "meet Eleanor Grace." I touched the baby's tiny hand, feeling the fingers curl instinctively around mine. "Hello, Eleanor," I said softly. "Welcome home." Matt never came to the hospital. I don't know if he even knew she had been born. But as I stood there, with Lily and Daniel and this perfect little life, I realized it didn't matter. He had chosen his absence long ago. We took Eleanor home 2 days later, and as I carried her into the house, I thought of the storm years before, the cold that had bitten into my bones as I dragged my suitcase through the snow. I thought of the slammed door, the laughter behind it. And then I looked around the room, at Lily, rocking her daughter, at Daniel unpacking tiny clothes, at the sunlight spilling across the floor, and I knew the truth. The storms had come and gone. The house was still ours. And now, there was another generation to love it. Matt could keep his packages, his apologies, his absence. We didn't need any of it. We had each other. And we had a future that would never belong to him. If you felt every sting of betrayal, every quiet victory, and every ounce of justice in my story, then you already know why I tell them. These aren't just tales, they're truths. I have lived long enough to learn that revenge doesn't always roar. It often arrives quietly, with the sound of a key turning in a lock that no one else can touch. So if you want to hear more true stories from a woman who has seen the worst of people and still found the best way to win, subscribe to Grandma True Stories. I have more to tell, and you don't want to miss what comes next.